All right, it is the top of the hour, so we are going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Identify gaps in your information governance strategy. We appreciate you joining us today, and the first thing I'd like to do is just take a second and introduce today's speakers. My name is Shayna Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimmal. And I'm joined by our key speakers today, Gimmal's product manager, Rick Wilson. And we are also excited to be hosting this webinar with Vice President of Technical Delivery at Lepide, Danny Murphy. Now, before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen. And at the end of the webinar, we will answer as many as we have time for. There will also be at least one poll question, so please keep an eye out for that. All answers are anonymous. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. Now, to kick things off, I just have a couple of slides to tell you a little bit about Gimmal, and then I'll hand it over to Danny to introduce Lepide for those who are not familiar with either company. Gimmal is an information governance software company founded in 2002. And our mission is to help you achieve your information governance goals by providing solutions that help you balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include migration from legacy systems, file analysis and e-discovery, electronic and physical records management, and document management for SAP. Now I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Danny so he can introduce Lepide.
Yeah, thanks, Shayna. Cheers. I was actually saying that it's great to be here, but I forgot to take myself off mute. So it's fantastic to be doing this this webinar with Gimmal today. Yeah, so I'll just start with explaining a little bit about about us as a company. Could you just move the slide on one, please? Oh yeah, great. I think there might be a bit of a delay. As you can hear, I'm over in the UK, so there might be a little bit of a delay between the transitions. But a bit about us at Lepide. We were founded back in 2015, and we really felt that the market for data security back then was really poorly served. And we saw a lot of kind of independent, siloed security solutions that just didn't really talk to each other. So what we've done is we've brought many different components together to really give it kind of context when we're looking at what people are actually doing with regards to our data and who's got access to it and so on. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail in today's demonstration. Today we've got around 65 employees globally, and as I said, I'm based in the UK. We've got offices out in India, and we're headquartered out in Austin, Texas, in the USA. We are currently the fastest growing data-centric audit and protection vendor on the market today, and we currently have around or over 1,400 customers who are with us today. So data-centric security is predominantly what we do. So what does this actually mean? Well, we protect unstructured data from rogue insiders, human error, and compromised user accounts by enabling you to prioritize threats based upon the impact of the data that matters the most. We do this by bringing together data discovery, as we're going to look at with Gimmal shortly, user behavior analysis, alerting, and anomaly detection. We bring this all together in a single platform. The key use cases and the key reasons why, or should we say the key challenges that we help organisations to solve. And again, the real reasons that we see people using Lepide is for these kind of 4 key areas. So really helping organisations to understand if there are any incidents that are leading to potential data breaches, understanding what's happening with that context, what's happening with our most sensitive unstructured data, and what threats are there being posed maybe by remote workers, again, rogue insiders, compromised users, or even just human error. The next use case or challenge that we help organisations solve is around ransomware attacks. So how can we detect and investigate or identify those characteristics that could be a potential ransomware attack in motion? And how can we detect compromised user accounts that are being leveraged for these particular attacks? And also, what if we were under attack and a ransomware attack was initiated successfully, what data has been affected by this particular incident? Thirdly, we're looking at privilege abuse and misuse. So tracking changes made within our core, our Active Directory, or maybe within Microsoft 365. How can I, again, identify rogue admins, compromised admin accounts at this time, or even just critical changes that have been made in human error that are having kind of adverse effects within our network? And then the final piece, and I guess the bit we're going to be focusing on most of all today, is around data access governance. So understanding and classifying our most sensitive data, again, which we're going to look at shortly with Rick. Understanding who's got access to what. And if they have got access, are those access levels appropriate? Do they actually need that access? And really identifying the data that's most at risk or overexposed sensitive data as well. That's really what we're offering through our data security platform. Once again, with the combination between Lepide and Gimmal, we're going to help you to identify, discover, and classify sensitive data based upon its content, giving it an associated risk and value. We're helping you understand who's got access to that data, if those access levels are appropriate. And if they should have access, how long have they had access, who granted them access, where is that access coming from? It's really around that kind of governance side of things. Again, we're going to look at that today. Insight is understanding how our users are interacting with our data as well. What are they actually doing with it? Are they copying, moving, modifying, creating, deleting our most critical data? And then finally, within our data security platform, we have Detect. So this is understanding incidents that could lead to potential data breaches, initial threats, and having a way to kind of detect and respond to those in real time, and also identifying any type of anomalous user activity around the data too. So yeah, I think I'm going to pass you back to Rick now, who is going to get us into the demonstration portion of this webinar today. So yeah, over to you, Rick.
Hey, thanks, Danny. Appreciate the fact that you're here with us today. My accent, if you're here in Pittsburgh, isn't nearly as interesting as yours, but it's always great to be working with you. So we're going to talk a little bit about two pieces to this equation: how to identify the gaps in your governance strategy, your information. And then Danny's going to help us understand how that can be a little bit better secured. One of the things I wanted to touch on before we kind of launch into that was the importance of the initiative. Many of us, of course, might understand that this is something that's important to the organization, but ultimately, if you want to take some action on it, you need to go get some budget approved. So I found a little story that I thought was really interesting. I wanted to share with you as we launch in here today. And it comes from Forbes magazine, actually the Forbes website. And it's about how a couple of major airlines were able to capitalize their information last year. Of course, COVID-19 pretty much shut down commercial aviation across the globe. And both United and American Airlines found themselves pretty cash strapped because they had no way to generate revenue. To help breach that or broach that gap as they were waiting for commercial aviation to pick back up again, they were both able to capitalize their frequent flyer information to apply for loans to help them continue operations. In United's case, the value that came back from a third-party appraisal was $20 billion for the information value of their frequent flyer program. And that was against a market cap of $9 billion. American did even better. Their range was 19.5 to 31.5 as the value of their frequent flyer information. And their market cap at the time was around 8 billion. So both of those organizations had more value in the information they were managing than actually the market cap of their entire company. So good statistics to kind of keep in mind as you think about how to make the case for some of the things we're going to show you today to your upper management. Shana, can we roll forward a slide, please? What we're hearing from our customers is this has been an incredibly challenging time for them in two areas in particular. One is the remote work environment. So being able to identify information that employees are keeping on their laptops, being able to control that, being able to discover it, perhaps apply some kind of oversight to it, has not been simple for many organizations because they weren't geared up for that before the pandemic hit. The second area that we hear on a fairly regular basis is increased regulation. This used to be compliance type regulations, the CCPAs and GDPRs, as you see listed on the slide, maybe GLBA or regulations like that. But more and more we see privacy kind of driving these initiatives. So the ability to locate information, perhaps apply some kind of retention rules to it or disposition to it if it's outlived its useful life, and be able to respond if a privacy challenge comes across has been tremendously popular with the clients that are examining Gimmal products these days. So I'd like to move into the demonstration phase. In just a minute here, we're going to talk about how to use our tools to identify critical business information. Danny's going to talk about how to analyze then that critical business information to determine what users are using it for, how they're actioning or interacting with that content, and who has access to your critical information. So Shane, I think we're ready to move to the demonstration slide, and let's see if I can share my screen. Great, hopefully that transition worked for everybody. So I'm going to log into the Gimmal Discover platform. Shana mentioned we've got a whole family of solutions to help you manage your content in a variety of ways. Today we're focusing on Gimmal Discover, which is our platform to allow you to manage content, discover content, perform electronic discovery across your content, and even classify it so that you can better control it moving forward. We're logged into the Gimmal dashboard right now. So Gimmal's Discover is a software as a service type application. Before we get into detail, I just wanted to show you briefly in the administration area here, the data areas that we're connected to. We're very sensitive to the fact that customers have their information scattered in a variety of repositories today. So what we've developed is an agent-based architecture that allows you to decide what information stores you'd like to manage. Perhaps that's your Microsoft Office 365 mailbox content. Maybe you've got information that's stored in Box or OneDrive or some other cloud storage repository like Google. Maybe you have the requirement to scan your SQL Server or Oracle databases for sensitive content. So what you see on the screen here is a list of the content areas that we can connect to today to search for and manage content inside Gimmal Discover. One of them, of course, is Windows File Path, which allows us to get out to those local workstations we talked about on the earlier slide. So you can have those workstations reporting to your Gimmal Discover dashboard. Many of our customers, in fact, some of our largest customers use that facility to be able to scan those devices on a regular basis for client confidential information and identify it and perhaps apply controls to that. That level of oversight is delivered through the data governance facility in Gimmal Discover. Data governance allows you to articulate a set of rules about how you want to manage content. We call that a workflow. So workflows are where you map out the criteria that are going to be used to address particular types of information, network or desktop file shares, OneDrive, SharePoint, Office 365 mailboxes. We've provided a facility here that allows you to build rules that match whatever your requirements are. So you're not locked into a specific way of interacting with that information. You can examine a message, an attachment in a mailbox. You can look at specific criteria of a file, including the content, to see if that file contains, as you see in my example here, maybe a credit card number, a social security number, some address information. So Gimmal Discover allows you to apply to a broad variety of use cases. These workflows then, and you may have many of them, can be attached to a policy that allows you to schedule them for execution. And that policy engine allows you to bring together that business rule that we just talked about in the workflow and marry it up with a specific set of what we call data targets. Data targets might be user mailboxes or individual laptops or workstations that are connected to Gimmal Discover. They could be select OneDrive sites. So there's a variety of ways to do that, and the policy helps you kind of bring that all together and schedule it for execution. What you see here in my list is that sensitive data example that we just looked at. So I created a policy to run against my sensitive data and look for things like credit card and social security numbers. And you can see that finished on the 20th. So that means in my reports area here, I should have a sensitive data report right here that we can bring up. So if you can imagine this be me running on a schedule against a network file share or a set of workstations on a weekly basis, set it up to run over the weekend, you come in on Monday morning and here's my report of sensitive data that was generated from this past weekend's scan. So you can see there's a number of files in the list here. I'm going to go over to this column that says sensitive data type, and I'm going to apply some filter criteria to maybe narrow the scope here. So what I'm going to do in this example is apply a filter that says we want to skip this if it contains an address, because we're not really interested in addresses today, but we are looking for some of this more pertinent information, in this case, US social security numbers, or perhaps credit card numbers. So now we've filtered down that list, and you can see I went from a little over 1,000 items down to 23 that have that specific type of information. If you want to get a little bit more intelligence other than just the name and location of that file, you'll notice over here in this first column, there's a full text view. This is an option. You can turn it on or off at the policy level, so you can choose whether or not to return this. But when you do, you get a rendered view of the content that was actually in that file that might be on the network share or the user workstation. And you can kind of scroll down through to find out what that file included, where that sensitive information might be present. This is exactly the type of information that I might want to have the Lepide platform pick up and analyze for me now. So I've been able to identify some files that have potentially sensitive information that I want to take further action on. And there are a couple of ways I could move forward with this now to pass this information over to the Lepide data security platform. One thing that I could do is export this list through a CSV function into a file that then can be imported into Lepide and have all of this content analyzed inside their platform. Danny will show you how to do that in just a few minutes. The other thing that we could do at this point is select individual files from the list. So maybe I'm going to look at these order files that apparently contained credit card information. And I could mark those files with a label. And I've done in this case, I've created a label called export to Lepide that I could apply to those rows on the report. And you'll notice the items that I marked now over in this label column have the export to Lepide label attached to them. That label can be used as an actioning tag in a subsequent workflow. So I could have a workflow run, examine this report for the items that were tagged, export to Lepide, and actually make copies of those files and place them into a network share that Danny's tool could import then and do further analysis on. So a couple of different ways to do this: pass the metadata by exporting a report, or actually make copies of the files so they can be further analyzed moving forward. We've seen both of those use cases apply in the real world. It just depends on what your specific requirements are and what makes most sense in your compliance scenario. So that's how Gimmal Discover will allow you to sort of define your criteria, analyze your files, and move forward. And then Danny, at this point, I think you can pick up with what would happen inside the Lepide platform.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Rick. Thanks for the demo. So yeah, I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you should be able to see that now. Can you see that, Rick?
Looks good, Danny. Got it.
Cool. Yeah, so that's great. So once we've got the export from Gimmal Discover, we can start to really give this information context. And the first kind of piece I wanted to talk about really was that insight into how our users are actually interacting with the data. You see, it really is all about that context. You know, we can enable this solution quite quickly and quite easily, but without that context, what does any of this really mean? It's all about identifying risk and prioritizing our most sensitive data and what we would call our highest risk data. So if we look at the report that I've displayed on the screen here, you can see basically a list of actions performed by individual users. And this is what we call data normalization when we talk about login user activities. So what I mean by this is information that you can easily read and filter and basically understand. So for example, if I select one of these records, we can see that this user Jill at this date and time opened this PDF from this location, and then using that information that we got from Gimmal Discover, we can see that this file contains social security numbers. We can give it an associated risk level. We can give it a monetary value as well, and we can map it to, based upon the content, to a specific compliance mandate or regulation. All of this is essentially out of the box technology, so you don't need to kind of configure any of this. Even the specific compliance mapping with regards to the data, all of those templates are built into the solution. So we can take this information, we can install the solution relatively quickly, and then we can start getting this kind of full audit trail from the solution. And the good thing about data normalization means that you can ask the solution questions quickly. So for example, if you just wanted a list of files that were copied that maybe contain, let's just say, social security numbers, for example, maybe by a specific user or with a specific name, a specific name to the file, we can get that information quite quickly. So from a kind of an investigative standpoint, it's really easy to get those answers to those questions. It's really easy to get those answers if you need them in different scenarios. All of these reports, again, are out of the box. We can export these reports. We can auto generate these reports. We can further apply complex filtering to really kind of expand this. And so what I mean by this is if we wanted to run an analysis over two separate date ranges with multiple users and multiple object paths and multiple content types, we can get into this into the details quite quickly using this solution as well. Now, everything we look at with regards to this audit trail is real time as well. So as and when these interactions are taking place, we're going to be logging those in real time. This also enables us to turn on our threat detection and understand if there are any potential threats that are being posed that could lead to specific incidents, that could perhaps lead to ransomware attacks. You know, we've got listed in here, as you can see, and I mentioned on one of the previous slides, potential ransomware attacks, anything that is potentially a threat to our highest risk or most sensitive data. So these are all built in. You can just turn these on and the solution will effectively start hunting for these threats based upon the characteristics and the behavior around the data that we're looking at. You can also right click and build these alerts yourself as well. So again, making sure that the solution is intuitive is obviously really important to us. So yeah, you can right click and everything's kind of wizard driven as well. So it's really, really easy to get up and running with this. As Rick mentioned, with Gimmal Discover, we support a wide array of data stores as well. So again, if you're looking through Microsoft 365, or if you're looking at on-premise file servers, maybe NetApp filers, looking, back in the cloud to Dropbox, or if you've got SharePoint on-prem, your mailbox data stores, all of this is also covered in the solution. So it is a very, very broad range of data stores that we currently support. So and probably the other thing that's worth mentioning is that if we're focusing on multiple data stores or multiple platforms from within the solution, because we combine it all together within the one solution, we can look, if we wanted to do an investigation on an individual, in this case, we're looking at a rogue admin and looking at sensitive data that they've accessed, in particular on a file server, but we're also tying that in with suspicious changes that they've made in Active Directory, in group policy, that is further providing access to other users, providing access to these other users to our most sensitive data in this case. So we can tie it all together, and you can bring in different components. Again, the alerting and scheduling and report generation is available throughout the whole solution. So we can take that information and then we really kind of move into the access governance side of things. So if I go to a different part of the solution, what I'm going to do is I'm going to analyze this user's behavior within Lepide, and I'm going to figure out where these permissions are excessive based upon their activity. So what I've done here is I've picked a directory and we can see a list of users that have got access to this directory. We can see their effective permissions. So in this case, everyone's got full access, which we should never really see. And then I've analyzed the user activity over the last 6 months. Now, once again, going back to that kind of context, that's exactly what we're looking at here. So we can see the information in the directory. We can see the content of those files, the map compliance, associated risk level and monetary values. That's where this kind of information becomes important. So you see that we've got a combination of blue ticks and red ticks. Now, what the blue ticks indicate is that those permissions are being used, and what the red ticks indicate is that the permissions are not being used. And this is quite commonly what we see when we are performing these analytics with organizations. We see a huge number of users that have got full access to the data. Now, whether that's because we've had new joiners and we've copied existing employees' permissions and privileges, which is obviously quite common, especially in the large organizations, we see what we call permission sprawl. And that's exactly what we're looking at here. So you can see these users, Glenn, Hector, James, Jay, they've all got full access, but realistically, in the last 6 months, they haven't done anything inside this directory. So really, we should be revoking access from them. They don't need to have access to all of this sensitive information. Even with the users that have got some blue ticks, we should be reducing those privileges. So what we're doing here is we're using this information to make better decisions and to really start to adopt what we call a least privilege model around our most sensitive and highest risk data. And then we can analyze that even further. We can start to look at how they're being granted those permissions. So I've just gone to our permissions analysis section. I'm looking again at data on one of my file servers, the same report that we were just looking at. I can see the files in there, the content of those files. I can see a list of the users and the access that they've got. But more importantly, in this view, I can see how they're being given those permissions, whether directly or indirectly through security groups in Active Directory. I can expand the security groups in Active Directory to see who else is a member. If I see any permissions that are directly applied and we want to revoke those permissions immediately, so making sure that the permissions are only being granted through the security groups in Active Directory, I can right-click the files and I can change the permissions from within here as well. So go directly to the access control list of that folder and remove Paul in this case if he shouldn't have direct access anyway. So just as we saw with the other reports as well, these are all filterable. We can export them. We can auto generate these reports and auto deliver these reports on a schedule that suits as well. And I guess the other thing is because we're predominantly we're talking about large amounts of data here and huge data sets. We're trying to make sure that everyone within the business has an understanding of the value of the data that they're actually interacting with. So making sure that these reports, for example, if we're looking at this kind of finance directory, is delivered to the department lead or the department manager, in fact. So they can review these permissions and they can say, well, this guy shouldn't have this access. Even if we see from the excessive permissions report that there's no interactions, we may want to verify that it's okay to remove that user from having access to that particular directory. But really, again, making sure that people within the business understand who's got access to the data that they are effectively responsible for, making them accountable. If people are being added to security groups in Active Directory and those security groups are governing access to the finance data, send the effective data owners, send them the alerts. Make sure that they know that someone's just been added to this group, which means that they've now got access to all of this data. Is that okay? Can they actually authorize that? Is that person supposed to have access to that data? So that's pretty much a kind of a high level overview of what we do with regards to how we can look at what users are doing with the data and also understand who's got access to the data and how they're being given that access as well. So what I'm going to do now is pass it back to Rick just to summarize what it is we've just looked at through the demonstration. It's together, and then pass it over to Shana to start wrapping things up.
Yeah, nice job, Danny. Thanks so much for the context. It's amazing what kind of information you can uncover through those sorts of analysis. I know we threw a lot of content at you in the last few minutes. We hope that this kind of gelled and makes sense. So how do we locate, identify information in a variety of repositories that might be important or perhaps unmanaged today, even more important, we're not aware of it, that dark data scenario, information that's been parked on a network share for the last 7, 8, 10 years that maybe you weren't aware of. What are my users managing on their desktops? Did they download a report from Salesforce that they forgot about and just left laying around with client confidential content in it? Answering those sorts of questions, and then be able to take that information and move it into a powerful analysis tool like Lepides so that you can understand who has access to it, how did they get access to it, what are they infer their intent and what they're trying to do with that information, and being able to revoke access when it's appropriate and manage that from a compliance point of view as well. So Shana, I'll just hand back to you. Certainly Danny and I are happy to take questions about any of this. I know that it was kind of complicated, so anything that folks would like to ask, would be happy to try and address.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I'm going to go ahead and flip it over to the next slide. We did a really brief overview of both solutions. If it was too brief for you, or if you'd like more information about specific use cases or even a personalized demonstration, you'll see a poll pop up right now on the screen. Just go ahead and feel free to put yes or no, not at this time. If you put yes, we'll make sure to have somebody reach out and get you the information you need. I want to remind everyone that if you do have a question, I see some coming in now, the Q&A section on the Zoom ribbon is the place to type those in. But while this poll is going, I'm going to go ahead and get started on the Q&A. I'm going to just answer the first one. We will be sending out a recording of this link between 24 and 48 hours. It's going to come from Gimmal in the form of a thank you email. So please keep an eye out for that if you are looking to see the recording of this presentation. So the first question I have is, can the tool that finds files, delete or move files?
I think that would be on the Gimmal side, Shayna, and we certainly can. So I showed you, of course, a reporting scenario where we were trying to identify critical or business information, but we can also act on that through the workflow interface that I showed you earlier, and we can implement copies or moves or deletes and some other actions alongside those. So absolutely.
Great. And then what platform do these tools cover? More specific, does it work with Office 365, etc.?
I won't presume
Yeah.
to answer for Danny, but I think we both have 365 covered, right, Danny?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think
Mhm.
it's a very broad range of platforms, certainly from the Lepide side, but exactly the same for Gimmal. So full on-premise support, your Windows servers, NetApp filers, SharePoint, Exchange, Mailbox, data stores, and yeah, and a host of other kind of cloud platforms as well. It's quite wide.
For sure. And to just add to that, a little forward-leaning information for you from a Gimmal perspective, we will be adding support for Microsoft Teams probably within the next 60 days. I look to have that available in the product sometime in the September timeframe for you.
Okay, and the next question, I'm not sure if this was already answered. Does the tool work with locating email information in email attachments?
Yeah, Shana, from a Gimmal point of view, we absolutely can open up any of the Microsoft email formats. So whether it's a 365 mailbox or a PST file, perhaps, maybe an archive in on-premise Exchange, any of those repositories, not only can we see the messages, but we can examine and open the attachment content and make decisions based on that as well.
Great. And is the solution real time in terms of audit trail and the alerts?
Yeah, I guess that's for me.
I think so, Dan.
Everything that we're looking at and that we've looked at today is completely real time. So there's no kind of scheduled file walks, or you don't need to wait for anything to complete to understand what users have been doing. As and when they interact with the systems or the data, you're going to be able to see that immediately in the reports, which enables our kind of analysis and real-time alerting to send you out those alerts real time, and also enables real-time response to these potential threats.
Great. And the last one I have here, unless there is another that sneaks in, what kind of infrastructure do I need to set up the Lepide solution? What's the best way to set it up?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So it's it's a flat infrastructure. It's a Windows application that resides, of course, on a Windows server, and we've got a SQL backend that we store all of the information that we've looked at in the reports today. We have full kind of scalability and load balancing options, so we can increase the hardware and software requirements to kind of scale out the performance of the solution. But in comparison to kind of competing solutions, this is definitely one of the more lightweight solutions. And I think, in addition to that, there's also a web console that can give access to all of the kind of the data and the reports that we've looked at today as well. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. If you can think of any other questions, all of our contact information is right there on the screen. Alternatively, if our names are a little too hard to remember, both companies' information should be on the slide now. You can contact either one of us in regards to a question with the other. We will make sure it gets answered. Like I said before, we will be sending out a recording of this presentation between 24 and 48 hours in the form of a thank you email. We appreciate you joining today's webinar and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Danny.